local government. Happy to talk to you about that as an aside. I know the focus is elections, but elections is one of those things, but it has become a real focus, as you say, in the past few years. So we have a bifurcated system in Arizona under the statutes. So we have a county recorder, which is a countywide elected official who's responsible for voter registration and mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is now the way, it's very popular in the West. It's the way that about 50% of the people in Maricopa County vote. The Board of Supervisors were responsible for day of voting, sort of like old-fashioned, election day voting in person, but also early in person, which is kind of big like in Florida, and it's becoming bigger now in Arizona. We're seeing more of it in this cycle. And then maybe most importantly, the board, so there's 5 of us, we're 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. We actually vote to certify the election. And so again, that used to be something that was ministerial, no one cared about. So that's the final piece. So we hire an elections director, the board does directly, who is responsible for that side of the house.
So let's take a time machine back to 2016. You're on the Phoenix City Council, is that correct? And there's a seat that's up for election in the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. What motivated you to run?
So I've been working on the city council for 7 years, love the work, love local government. But the more and more work I did there at the city, I kind of realized that the issues of that really motivated me were more regional in nature, right? Whether it's air quality issues, regional transportation, and elections. That was one of them. The Phoenix City Council was very rancorous, so at that time. So a lot of people told me, Bill, go over to the Board of Supervisors. It's a great job, and it'll be a lot calmer than the City Council.
Okay, so that didn't quite play out, but let's focus on that election in 2016. You're an outsider to the election administration because you're running for elections then. From your perspective as an outsider, what are you seeing? Is it a controversial space with respect to election administration as you're going into that election? Is there a lot of political conflict? You talk about rancorous Phoenix City Council. Is there rancor? Is there disagreement at the election administration level with respect to the Board of Supervisors? What does that election look like at that time?
So the primary and the general were very calm. Okay. But interestingly, in the presidential preference election, there were some issues that occurred. It wasn't political in nature, but it was an administrative hiccups. There were a lot more people who showed up to vote day of. And so we actually had 2 to 3 hour lines. Wow. And this captured everyone's attention. We've got a lot of news helicopters like you have in Southern California, have a lot of those in Phoenix. So you have the news helicopters, look at these lines. And sadly, both our county recorder and the Secretary of State ended up getting voted out of office later that year because that captured people's attention. But it wasn't partisan in nature. It was an inconvenience. It was what I would say sort of a voter experience situation that is unacceptable. You don't want to have lines of that length, although I do say, people wait in line for everything else. So it's fine to wait in line, 30 minutes an hour. But when you're getting 2 to 3 hours, that's a problem. So it was starting to capture people's attention. As you know, people started for the first time ever to be focused on elections administration, of course, in 2000 with Bush v. Gore. So in 2016, it was starting to get people's attention a little bit more.
So we move forward to 2020. There are some hiccups that you described, a little bit more focus on election administration. You are now on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. How much did you anticipate what was to come before it happened? What did you prepare for, and how did you prepare?
So go back in our time machine to 2020, and the issue that we were preparing for, and our team did a great job for, was running a presidential election in the middle of a pandemic. That's what our focus was on, and our folks did an incredible job. And I've been involved in elections for a long time. I was an election day lawyer for the Republican Party for many years. And I have to tell you, as I was driving around that day for the general election, I've never seen a smoother election. Wow. Never. It was like glass, smooth as glass. Everything was going great. We were all feeling good about this. It's like, how could this be? Again, we were concerned about sort of the COVID protocols and would that create issues? And it didn't. It was smooth.
Wow. And yet, it didn't feel so smooth afterwards. So
That's
the
right.
election occurs. The early tabulation suggests it's going to be a close race, and it ends up being a close race. Biden wins by about 11,000 votes statewide. So what's happening during the tabulation process, and what happens afterwards in terms of public scrutiny and partisan pressure?
So within a couple of days, well, first of all, the first thing that happened that headed things in the wrong direction was that Fox News called Arizona for Joe Biden on election night. And people couldn't believe it. I think a lot has been written about that. And very quickly over the next couple of days, the focus of the alt-right, I'll say it, came to Maricopa County. So we actually had outside of our tabulation center, Alex Jones from InfoWars. We had a lot of far-right Congress members. We had a lot of heavily armed people outside of our tabulation center. We had one incident with the Univision reporter who was being, harassed in very awful ways by some of the people outside. So very quickly, our sheriff, who we have a great relationship with, Democrat, by the way, you see this sort of bipartisan theme that has played out in Maricopa County. He called us up and said, guys, this is bad what's going on down there. And that the front door there was pretty much exposed to this. So very quickly we put up temporary fencing. We were concerned that these folks might actually rush the tabulation center. Of course, this was before January 6th, but we had those concerns. So we very quickly put those barriers up outside the tabulation center. And then that's when my colleagues and I started getting pressure from our fellow Republicans. I had a phone call from Kelly Ward, then the chairwoman of the Arizona Republican Party, who, by the way, has been indicted as an alternate elector. And she said, I want you to call Sidney Powell. And I was like, I don't know who the Sidney Powell is, but I'm not going to call her. I think we all know who she is now. Coming up to the certification date, that day I was receiving text after text from Kelly Ward saying, Bill, you guys don't need to certify the election yet. Here are these various things, dead people voting, Dominion machines flipping votes. Donald Trump actually called my colleague Clint Hickman, who was the chairman of the board at that time, twice. This is Clint Hickman, who was at every rally Donald Trump had in Maricopa County in 2020. He literally got shout outs from President Trump. He refused to take those phone calls because he knew that it wasn't going to go to a good place. So so the night of the vote, we voted to certify the election. We were in COVID protocol, so there was really no members of the public within our auditorium, but you could hear the people outside like banging on drums. We now know, if you guys have seen the guy known as the QAnon shaman, who on January 6th had the horns, he was outside of our auditorium, pounding. And I asked all these questions. I raised these questions with our elections team about dead people voting, Dominion machines, all of that. But my colleagues and I were convinced that the election was safe and secure. And so we voted to certify the election. And we hoped that that would be the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're a lifelong Republican. And there were many Republican administrators that were quite courageous in what they did in terms of certifying results and not responding to the pressure or not giving in to the pressure. But there were others that it felt did give in to a bit to the pressure, not to the results of undermining the elections, but you could see the potentially coming around the corner. So I just want to get into your mindset at that time, right? There's kind of this party loyalty, and you have pressure from fellow Republicans. How are you feeling at this moment? Is it one in which you're feeling conflicted, stressed, worried, perhaps considering, the opportunity to look into it and investigate further to damaging effects towards the election? How are you feeling, and what are you thinking at this time?
Yeah, it was a stressful time, obviously. You know, I've been at now, 15 years in elected office. And, one of my friends once said, what a politicians, what's the number one goal? To survive, right? I mean, if you don't survive, if you get beat, you don't get to do all those good things. Hopefully that's the reason that you ran. And so I think my colleagues and I were thinking about that. We understood the pressure that was being put on us. We understood the impact that this would have on our party, and of course on our country. But in the end, because we ran, our direct report ran the election, I didn't feel like we really had any choice. This was not a partisan issue for me. This was a leadership issue. And as the leader of the Board of Supervisors, we lead the elections team. If they had done something wrong, then it would be our responsibility to address that and root it out. But they were, like I said before, they ran a great election. There was nothing that was wrong as we looked through everything. And by the way, we've said many times the 2020 election in Maricopa County may have literally been one of the most scrutinized in the history of the world. There have been so many different audits and looks at it, but I felt confident that this was, the right thing to do. And where things went to next, I couldn't really worry about that. I had to support our folks. I had to do what was right. But again, really never could have imagined what would come next.
So let's talk about the immediate next. You certify the results. January 6th, of course, occurs. There's impeachment, but of course not conviction in the Senate. And maybe we kind of think that, whew, we dodged that bullet. Democracy will survive. But things don't stop after the election in Arizona. What's going on in that period after Biden takes office?
So I'll even just step a little bit earlier in
Okay.
that. Even in December of 2020, after we've certified the election, after the Secretary of State has certified it, we get a subpoena from the Arizona State Senate, actually just the president and one other member, saying turn over all the ballots, the 2.1 million ballots that were cast in Maricopa County and the tabulation machines. We had significant concerns that we were not legally allowed to do that. But we were pressured, and so we decided to go to court. Let's get a ruling from a judge saying whether this subpoena is valid. We asked for an expedited hearing for the court, but despite that, the Arizona State Senate was getting immense pressure to put pressure on us. So the day after the Super Bowl in 2021, my colleagues and I were subjected to a vote of the Arizona State Senate. And if that vote would have passed, my colleagues and I would have been arrested for going to court asking for a ruling. Fortunately, one Republican member of the Arizona State Senate decided to flip his vote and voted against it in what I thought was one of the most courageous political acts I've ever seen. He is no longer in office as well. And the absurdity that we came that close to it. Eventually, we did go to court, and the court said it was a valid subpoena. And so we turned over those ballots and the tabulation machines to the state Senate. And that is what then became known as the Cyber Ninja audit, which was neither an audit and they weren't really ninjas. But they knew nothing about elections. And we now know, due to great reporting, that this was basically a front for the Trump campaign that was looking for one state where they could show that the results were not accurate. And they talked about the dominoes all the time. They said that if Arizona would fall, that domino would fall. Then these other states, the states in the blue wall in the north, would do the same. So this is what we were dealing with. And during that time, we turned the ballots over and we tried to keep our head down. We tried to move on. But then very quickly, the president, and I'm not talking about like a backbencher, the president of the state Senate was saying in these hearings that our people had deleted files, which is a crime. And we eventually had had enough of it. So my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors and our county recorder, Stephen Richer, who, by the way, had just been elected, in 2020, he was not running this election. We stood up and said, we held a press conference in April, and we said these words. We said, Joe Biden won Maricopa County. And we were told by the press there that that was heard back in Washington, D.C. What a radical concept that Joe Biden had won Maricopa County. This is how bad things had gotten.
Well, one more question about 2020, and that's about media. Now, my first contact with you was on CNN, watching you, often in the Maricopa County Center that was responsible for tabulating the votes, and you were a regular, and I imagine that was intentional, to be a regular on media. What was behind the media strategy, and what were you trying to do?
So, little known fact that in Republican school, they tell you not to talk to the media. Okay? And I had to overcome that. I had to overcome that because of what happened. We understand that those who are out there that are spreading misinformation and lies about our election system, I'm doing battle with one right now. Battle, that's not, I'm being challenged with one right now by the name of James O'Keefe. If you go on my X, you can read about it. He has 2.7 million followers. A lot of these folks had millions and millions and millions of followers. I have a few thousand followers on X. I cannot compete with that. But we figured out that if we went to the media and we told our story, we explained to them about elections administration, this thing that people haven't focused on because they haven't needed to focus on it, right? This is the background. This should be in the background. But we decided that we needed to reach out to the media to tell folks the facts. And by the way, if you want to read more about, how we do things, we've put up a website called justthefacts.vote, where we go through each one of these conspiracy theories and we address them. So if you have people if you have concerns, or if you have people in your family who have concerns, this hopefully will give you the tools that you need to address that. So it was very intentional. I never could have imagined that I would be talking to the media that I have in the last 4 years, and not only national media, but there has been intense international interest in Maricopa County. There continues to be. And so that's something else that I say to people. When we engage in bad behavior, not only are young people watching that, not only is the next generation with our own country watching it, but the rest of the world is watching it. And I have been reminded through these interactions just how much the rest of the world looks up to our democracy. And unfortunately, to the extent that we are doing things that are eroding our own democracy, it threatens to erode other democracies, especially emerging democracies in other places in the world.
So many of those folks that are involved with running elections care deeply about democracy. They do the work because they're inspired to keep our democracy running and doing a good job with every election. Many of these folks are not paid very much or not paid at all to participate in this work. And yet these misinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories have targeted many election administrators. Could you describe some of the impact that these misinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories have had on election workers?
Yeah, well, thank you for raising the election workers, because that's what it's all about. These people inspire me every day. They're true heroes. You all may have some family members who've done this for years. Yeah, they don't do it for the money. Right. No one grew up wanting to be an elections administrator, although I think that might be changing. Right. But certainly that's not been the case. And so they just come in to do the good work. Now, for me, I ran for office. Mm-hmm. My colleagues ran for office. We did have to understand that there could be some attention on us. We could take some heat. But the people who are working in our elections offices around the country never signed up for it. And I'll give you one example. It was sadly just from the last week. So James O'Keefe, it's OMG, O'Keefe Media Group. He is going on X right now, and he's telling people that he will give them cameras that they can take, hidden cameras into elections offices around this country. And one of his people took a hidden camera into our office recently in Maricopa County and asked some questions of our trainers. They then posted that last week, And in their post, it has the picture and name of our elections workers. We're now having to deal with the fear that they have, the harassment. If you want to see the type of things that they're receiving, again, go onto my X page. I don't mean to, emphasize this. It's really unpleasant, but people need to understand what's going on. One of those people is no longer going to be a trainer. She's quit. These people don't care about the impact that they're having on individuals. They've got an agenda that is not consistent with it's really inspiring to be here and the history that surrounds me. And I thought about that this morning. How would the founding fathers feel about what's going on right now? That's why, the impact that this has had on me individually, personally, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is too important. And that we have people doing these sorts of things, and then that people are following them. Good people who, I imagine that. If I honestly believed that elections were being stolen in this country, there's nothing that I wouldn't do. But these people are being fed lies. And because people want political power or they want to raise money, that's what it's about for them.
So I imagine, I no doubt that on all of our minds is the fact that the election, 2024 election, is 8 days away. Are you ready?
We are. We are ready. Now, here's the good thing. Let's give some positive news. We've been in this situation now. This will be the third cycle, election cycle, where we've had this sort of scrutiny, this sort of pressure. Our folks, despite these awful things that have been done, they are committed to the mission. They are great professionals, and they're ready. And we at the Board of Supervisors, we have made the investments that need to be made. We put in $15 million just since our last election to put in new printers in 2022. We had some issues with some of the printers on election day. We've got all new printers. We have new high-speed tabulators to make sure that the results get reported as soon as they possibly can. If this election comes down to Maricopa County in Arizona, you will hear about how, quote, slow it takes us to count the votes. Understand that the way that we're doing elections is the same way we've done it for decades. We're not slow rolling the results, as some have said. But it's important that you understand the truth and sort of the perception. So people will say Arizona takes too long to count the votes. Not really. We don't really take that much longer than anyone else. It's that we have such close races that the networks can't call the races on election night. So you hear in Florida, maybe even Virginia, oh, well, they've called it for Harris or they've called it for Trump. That doesn't mean they're done with all the votes. It means, they can, based upon how things are going, they feel confident in that. So there are also some differences in election law having to do with mail-in ballots and being able to drop them off on election day that does elongate that process somewhat. But it's important when you maybe your family members or your friends will say, what is wrong with Arizona? We're following the law, we're doing it right, and trust me, we will get the results reported and certified so that we will be able to have Arizona's electors' votes will be counted towards who the next president is.
So you described the addition of new printers and to expedite the process and to limit the possibility of breakdown. Are there other changes that you've made since 2022 and 2020 to the election administration process that's seeking to respond to those who have concerns about the integrity of the election, those who have concerns about the safety and security of elections? And how confident are you that the Maricopa County elections will be safe and secure?
So I'm very confident that the elections will be safe and secure. Some of the biggest changes we made, in addition to what I've already mentioned, is the transparency. We continue to double down on transparency with every cycle. So we have taken thousands of people through on tours of our facility, including, those who question the way that we run elections. And in fact, to me, those are the people that I really want to go through. Like I say, it's fun to talk to people who all agree with me, makes me feel good, but we're not really moving the needle. When we move the needle is when we go to people who question things. And one example of this was the day after the Super Bowl. Everything keeps coming back to the Super Bowl, I guess. The day after the Super Bowl in 2023, the sort of famous pollster Frank Luntz headed up a focus group in downtown Phoenix of people who believed that the 2022 election was stolen in Maricopa County. And these were 13 people. They sat around, and I was part of a panel, including the Georgia Secretary of State, and we listened to what these folks said. And it was hard to listen to them. It was really, really hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. We sat up there for 2 hours, responded to them, listened to them. But when it was over, we had quite a bit of interaction with the group. We talked with one another. And one of the guys on the focus group, his name was Chad, he came up to me, we talked a bit. And I said, Chad, would you be willing to come down to the tabulation center? He said, sure. So he came down, spent 2 hours with me, with our elections director. We showed him around, showed him everything. And at the end, he said, okay, I'm convinced these elections are safe and secure. Now, unfortunately, we can't do that with everyone. We don't have the time or the resources to do that. But just knowing that it can be done, that's hard work, but we will continue to do that. In addition, you know, the communications effort, internal communications, was really pretty small before 2020. Now we have a team of folks who are monitoring social media, they're monitoring the networks, and we're determining in real time what it is that we're going to respond to. Because we can't spend all day, all week, responding to misinformation. So our focus has been, we want to focus on misinformation that impacts the voter's experience, right? That causes them to make the wrong decisions. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the deep fake, you know, the AI deep fakes, you know, that has me up there saying, oh, the polling places are closed today. Hope you voted by mail, haha, you know, all these sorts of things. Like making sure to the extent that that is going on out there, addressing it very quickly and stressing with folks that you need to go to your trusted sources. Don't go to AI chatbots to figure out where to vote. Go to Maricopa.vote in our area. And so we've really leaned into that. We have another press conference tomorrow. So we'll do 3 press conferences before the election and you know, probably several after the election, especially depending upon whether this election comes down to Maricopa County or not.
Absolutely. So this will be your last election as a member of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. So on June 1st, 2023, you announced on X that you will not run for re-election to the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors in 2024. In one part of the post, you write, as this chapter comes to an end, I rest well knowing that I led with integrity, compassion, and dignity. In another part of the post, you say, my will to fight for the truth remains unhindered, and I look forward to Maricopa County running the 2024 election. Now, you've been in public service for at least 13 years, and I don't think anyone should begrudge your decision to step aside. But I do wonder how much the stresses of the position since 2020 have contributed to that decision.
It was certainly part of it. You know, that, like I said, this is not anything I signed up for, and certainly not what my wife and our girls signed up for. We have 3 daughters who are in their early 20s. It's been really hard for them. It's been hard for us as a family, but that's certainly not the only reason. I mean, I have, you know, when I'm done at the end of this year, I will have done 15 years as an elected official in local government. I've had the opportunity to work on so many incredible things, incredibly important. We're the public health authority in Maricopa County, so we dealt with the COVID response. And same thing there, you know, we actually voted, the Board of Supervisors, 4 of 5 of us Republicans, to institute a mask mandate. That was also incredibly unpopular with a lot of our fellow Republicans, but we were listening to the experts, our public health experts. We felt like it was the right thing to do. So when you work on things like that, I mean, just elections and the pandemic alone sort of seem like the most important things I could imagine to work on in local government. You have to know when it's time to sort of move on, pursue other things. But it's been just an incredible group that I've worked with. primarily Republicans, who have stuck together, which is rare in politics. That we haven't had one of us sort of try and capitalize from this politically. We stuck together. Everyone wanted to do the right thing. And I'm so inspired to be a part of this group. And I know that these groups are rare. The dynamics will change. Of the 5-person board, 3 of us are leaving at the end of this year. It'll be a new board. This is the right time for me.
So just a couple more questions, and then I want to give you guys a chance to ask your own questions from the audience. But you've been open about your mental health struggles related to the trauma that you have experienced as an elected official in Maricopa County in the last 5 years. Would you be open to sharing with us the trauma that you've been trying to manage for the past couple of years?
Sure. You kind of hear these stories and it's like, wow, that's a lot. And I have always had kind of a steady Eddie personality, right? Kind of the quiet guy on the whatever body I was on. As we continued to deal with this, my wife started to notice that I was, appeared withdrawn and distracted. And then when I started to go out, the hardest part for me has been the lack of support or the out and out, hostility from other Republicans. Unfortunately, politics is been described by some as a blood sport. Politics ain't beanbag, but you expect that from the other side. Unfortunately, that's how it is today. But you don't expect it from your own team. You don't expect it from your own party. And that's what I experienced. And it was incredibly hard because I've always been a team player. Started the Teenage Republican Club at my high school, college Republican, Harvard Law School Republicans. I was always the guy kind of waiting my turn. And then I get into this situation and to have my integrity questioned. For people to say that I would rig an election so that Joe Biden was our president, that was incredibly traumatic. And so I went to a couple of events. I started to see some of these people I hadn't seen in a long time because of COVID restrictions. And the anger that I would feel. I was in an event with that president of the state Senate. And I didn't go talk to her, but I was talking to another group. And I mean, I could feel it was like one of those cartoons, like with the thermometer just, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I went to another event. My wife was there. And there was it was with a few Republican election lawyers, was incredibly frustrated with. And I started yelling. I mean, I was like gesticulating. My wife grabs my arm. She's like, what the hell are you doing? What is going on? You're not the man that I married. This isn't what has happened to you? And she said, you got to get help. And so within a week, I was in therapy for the first time in my life. And it was incredible. This was in 2022. And it was exactly what I needed. I'd never done it. The stigma, especially as males, we're sort of told like, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, move on. That's what politics is about. But the people that are in elections, this is too much. And it's not just me. I mean, it's thousands of us across the country that are dealing with this. And so once I went through it, it really helped me. It sort of gave me the wide stance that I needed for the 2022 election. And then I have a friend who's a reporter for the Washington Post. And I went on background, told her about it. And she's like, I want you to tell your story. Would you be willing to do that? I was like, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know if I want to be known as the PTSD guy. Because I struggle with PTSD. You hear PTSD, you think like a soldier, first responder, gunshot victim. But my therapist helped me understand, trauma is trauma. And this was a traumatic experience I dealt with that I needed to get help for. So I agreed to be interviewed. And I'm so happy that I did it because of the people who have come to me and shared their stories with me because they read the article. That was like a gift that each one of them has given me. And it helps me to continue to process this because this is a lot. This is a lot that all of us have dealt with who are in elections, but really all of us as a country that we're going through.
Well, I can say I'm grateful for it as well, and I'm sure many others. Now, let me ask a broad final question. Seeks your perspective not only as a member of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, but also as an American who cares deeply about our democracy, who is also a family man with a caring and loving wife and children that you often talk about in the news articles. Has it been worth it? And do you think our democracy is at risk of failing despite the efforts that you and other courageous election administrators have put into it?
So, I mean, what a great question. Has it been worth it? It may be too early to answer that question. I may have a different perspective as we see how things play out. But I remember in September 11th, I was giving a bottle to our baby, who's now 23. She was 7 months old, and I was giving her a bottle as I watched the second plane go into the World Trade Towers. I was practicing law at the time. And I remember thinking, like, if I had a microphone right now, if I had the opportunity, a position to say something, maybe I could say something, important that might touch people. And wouldn't that be great to be able to help people like that? So years later, now I'm elected, now I'm in local government, and my moment comes, this election, and I do something so mundane. I do my job. Simple math. And people say nice things about us, but we just did our jobs. We just did our jobs. And to think that this is something that people, that I would get to come here and talk about doing a ministerial role. How ironic, but I think it's a good reminder for us of this democracy. We talk about these grand ideals, but in the end, in the Constitution, which I revere, but in the end, I think as we've been reminded, the Constitution is important, but it's people in the end. It's these people who work in elections. It's people who serve in local government, all the way up to the president. We all play a role, and that's the beauty of this system. For those people who worry about an election being rigged, it's really hard to rig an election when it's run in thousands and thousands and thousands of jurisdictions by literally millions of people. That's one of the things that I always ask people who, have these concerns. It's like, how do you think that this conspiracy happened? That there wasn't one person who raised their hand and said, guess what? It never happened. It can't happen in our system. But unfortunately, there are people now who will weaponize a small mistake and turn it into supposed evidence of a conspiracy. But I have great faith in this democracy. It has been incredibly difficult, what we've gone through the past few years, but we have held. We will hold again this year. And so one of the things I've started talking about, if President Trump wins a safe and secure election, we need to make sure that this behavior doesn't move to the other side. We have to accept the results, plain and simple. Whoever wins, there's too much on the line. The language that's being used in this campaign, on both sides, it is feeding into this, that this is a life or death election. It's important. But in the end, what really matters is that this system holds, the democracy holds. And I honestly, genuinely believe that it will. But we can't keep doing this cycle after cycle. It's not sustainable long term. And that's where all of you, play such an important role to make sure you were here. You will remember what happened. And you need to pass on to the next generations. We can never go back here again. We just can't.
So now I want to open up to questions that folks might have from the audience.
Sorry.
Oh,
So I just saw earlier today that ballot boxes in Washington and Oregon were like minors in period, and that happened in baseball last week. So what happens when a ballot box is fired?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We just had this happen. Fortunately, it was not, at least in Arizona, this was not a terrorist plot. It was just some guy that wanted to go back to jail. So it was really a bad decision. But what happens then if you're doing mail-in and there is a fire like that? We have a system where people can sign up for text alerts. Very, very popular in Maricopa County. So you mail in your ballot, you get a text back that says, hey, we received your ballot is being processed. So we tell people to sign up for that. And if they do not receive that text within a few days, to contact us, and we can make sure that they get a new ballot, either, a new mail-in ballot, or they can come in. So this is one of those changes that we've made over the past few years that's highly popular, very transparent. But this is a concern, and we don't know what to expect, unfortunately, because there is so much attention and people who have a real incentive to create chaos right now, unfortunately.
Mr. Gates, thank you so much for being here. I'm Elizabeth. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your decision to certify or to vote to certify the election. The HBO documentary, Stopping the Steal, spotlighted a few of your colleagues who were saying that it was a moment of uncertainty because they didn't know how the other members of the Board of Supervisors were going to vote and whether they would certify. Was that your experience as well? And was the decision to certify something that you made privately or something that you talked with others about?
Yeah, great question. So again, this was uncharted territory. We in 2020, the first sort of election board that you heard sort of grappling with this was in Michigan, and there were a couple of Republican members of this Michigan election board. They voted not to certify, and then they changed their opinion. It was so first of all, we have something in Arizona called the open meeting law. So we cannot have more than two of our colleagues talk to one another about any item that's coming before the board. So that's, sort of a sunshine, one of those sunshine laws, so that we make sure that the processes occur in the public and people have the opportunity to weigh in. So there were certain limitations on our ability to even talk to one another. I did not know where I was going to be. This is the thing, but throughout, as a lawyer, and my philosophy has been that I don't like to prejudge things. I believe in open meetings. I think it's, whether we're talking about a zoning case or some controversial issue, I like to hear the public comment, and then I make my mind up. It's very frustrating to lobbyists. They're like, where are you at? Where are you going to be, Bill? I'm like, we have a meeting. I'm going to listen to what happens. So that's very much my approach. Clint Hickman, who was the chairman at that time, he came out with he put out a letter in Wednesday. We voted on a Friday, on Wednesday, that basically laid out, beautiful letter, laid out, this is what I've looked at. I have confidence this was safe and secure. I'm going to be voting to certify the election. That was an incredible act of political courage by Clint. Again, this was the guy who was at the, when former President Trump flew into town, he was the guy who was there, lifelong Republican as well. And when he put that out there, that was very important. For me, I really did have an open mind on this. I believed that I was going to certify the election, but as I said, when I was getting these text messages from Kelly Ward, I think the lawyer in me is like, we need to look into this. We need to dig into it. But once I had done that, everything that I heard satisfied me. And so, that's why I voted to certify the election. And in my remarks, I spoke about my grandfather, who's a World War II veteran. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. And I talked about the oath that he made as a member of the U.S. Army, and the oaths that I had made both as an attorney and as a member of the Board of Supervisors. And that's what it was all about, right? It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about partisan politics. But I will never forget, I'll never forget Clint Hickman and his leadership in putting that letter out. And the bond that has been created by the five of us who served together is like just a special gift that I have, that I'll always have.
Hi, I'm Ella. Thanks so much for coming. I loved what you said about emerging democracies around the world and just wondered if you could share a little bit more about America's role as being an example to the rest of the world and which countries you think specifically are focusing on the morality of this election.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. You know, when I testified in front of the House Oversight Committee in 2021 about the Cyber Ninja audit, in my prepared remarks, you know, I said it was I was graduated from high school in 1989. So that's the year that the Berlin Wall came down. And so it was always kind of my dorky dream was someday I could go to a former Soviet republic and like be part of a, you know, emerging democracy movement or election observing party, but I never imagined that I'd be fighting for democracy in my own country. And you know that's what it's really about here. You would be amazed. Everyone. I mean, I've spoken with 5 reporters from Switzerland in the last month. I mean, Europe is fascinated. European countries, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. But I think for me, I am particularly concerned about some of the emerging democracies in Eastern Europe and also in Africa. I had the opportunity to be on a panel with election leaders, part of the election commissions in Mexico and in Ghana. And the 3 of us, basically our stories were exactly the same. You know, the intimidation, the folks that would try and tear down elections officials, the focus on people's looks. I mean, the dehumanization that's gone on. And when you have those conversations, you start to look at this. For example, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but in Moldova, they just had an election. And guess what? There's a tycoon in Moldova who was paying people to register to vote in Moldova. Sound familiar? I mean, there are connections on this throughout the world. I was interviewed by a reporter for Foreign Policy last week. I mean, these things are going on. So when you see things on, you know, social media or elsewhere, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know what the motivation is of these folks. That's why we are always stressing, go to those trusted voices. But I mean, just the sadness that I have that if we fail in this democracy, that it would impact democracies around the world. Everyone is watching us. Unfortunately, as Americans, we don't tend to focus on the rest of the world and their systems, but the rest of the world is watching us and focusing on us, and that's why we have to do the right thing.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sydney. So where do you see the future of the Republican Party post-Trump? Do you think that election integrity and his rhetoric will still be relevant, or do you think that it will go back to kind of the party of Reagan?
What a great question. That's a question that I think about a lot. A lot of my colleagues think about it. I was texting with Adam Kinzinger this morning, someone who's, you know, who's dealing with this right now. I don't know. I do think, though, from a just political, forget what's right, forget morality, just political perspective. I think if the Republican Party wants to be a majority party moving into the future, we need to de-emphasize. I mean, I care about election integrity as much as anyone. You know, I did this work as a member of the Republican Party, but we need to get back to what it was, which is making sure that every eligible vote is counted, that there aren't any questionable activities, but not that we're attacking elections workers. So I think if the Republican Party gets back to those Reaganite principles that drew me and so many people my age into the Republican Party, it will be successful. It can be a majority party. But I fear that this path that the party has gone down is the wrong thing for the country, but also it's the wrong thing from an electoral perspective. And in the end, you know, I always remind people, it's like political parties are not charitable organizations. They're organized for one reason, to win elections. And people tend to be rational. And if you keep losing elections in swing districts, in swing states over and over and over again, you would think that at some point you would start to adjust your strategy to a way that you would start winning more elections. So I guess, silly me for being rational, but I hope that that's what happens. It's been really gratifying. All the Democrats who have come to me and my colleagues and said, look, we need two fully functioning parties. We want to go back to the way, it used to be. And they're absolutely right. One-party democracies are not sustainable. And having a situation where, we essentially have very, very few swing districts, swing states left, it's not good for the system. It's not sustainable.
One last question. Yes, Pekra.
Hey, thank you again for being here. I just had a quick question. You mentioned that sort of like both sides right now are doing the whole, or sort of questioning, I guess, engaging in maybe questionable conduct related to like election integrity or whatever. But I sort of see more asymmetry. I mean, to what extent are folks on the left or like the organized Democratic Party, to what extent is it sort of undermining at this moment election integrity, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, look, I'm not saying there's an equivalency right now. There clearly is, and what we're seeing from the Republican Party right now, we've not seen before. But there have certainly been, Stacey Abrams questioned the 2018 gubernatorial election in Georgia. Katie Porter, when she lost her primary earlier this year in California, questioned those results. And there had been a few reports of people getting a little squishy when asked how they might respond to Donald Trump's election. So I hope that this is not anything we have to worry about. But here's the problem is now we have a lot of, especially young Democrats and young people on the left who've now seen for years people in the Republican Party doing this. And you can imagine people saying, well, they did it. Why shouldn't we? This is why it's so dangerous. This is why we can't go down that road. I don't think that's going to happen, but I have to be prepared to speak out against it if that goes on the left as well. It's not a partisan issue. It's about the system. It's about leadership within our electoral system.
Thank you.
I want to thank you and express my appreciation for you coming to talk to us today. I think that election administration has become something that's more in the forefront, but it's rare that we have this opportunity to have a real conversation with an election administrator who has been on the front lines and who has had to deal with the challenges that folks that are connected with elections face. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your open-mindedness. I appreciate your bipartisan approach to this. And I think that I want to be as optimistic as you about the future of American democracy. But it's really helpful to get that optimism from someone who is right there seeing democracy at work. So I hope you all will join me in thanking Mr. Bill Gates for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.